Thank you so much for supporting this work, my Race, Rage, and Fear Patreon. Thank you so much for my patrons who are helping to be anti racist in your anti racist work and to fight against racism and racial violence through education and direct action. So glad that you continue to support this work, and please continue to like and share. If you're interested, go to patreon.com/race, rage, and fear for more information and for some behind the scenes stuff. Thank you again to all my patrons. Reverend Derek here with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube at Rev Derek Terry, and of course on TikTok as well at Reverend Derek Terry. This month's theme, the Revolutionary King. The definition of revolutionary is relating to sudden or complete marked changes, something that is radically new, innovative, or outside the established procedure. And that's what we're looking at. Dr. King and how he was revolutionary. This is important to our anti racist education because Dr. King is the central figure, the ideological thinker and mind behind many of the ideas and practices around human rights, human dignity. King is the most quoted person on this topic. The I Have a Dream speech that we discussed today is the most quoted speech on this topic. Most people focus on the I Have a Dream portion of the speech, but today we're going to look at the part before the dream. We're going to look at what King covers in the first part of the speech before he goes into what I call the sermon portion. To that end, I will not cover the dream portion of this speech, but you should read it, you should hear it, you should know it. It was probably one of the best speeches ever delivered, especially in the last 200 years. But in this video, we're going to focus on the speech that King prepared to give that day. The working title, Normalcy No More, or Normalcy Never Again. The words that he meticulously crafted, the words that encompassed exactly what he wanted to say to the country and to the world that day. The speech was actually quite revolutionary. It invoked change. It was actually radical. It was calling for great change, for a way of life outside of the established procedure, a change from the status quo, and that's exactly what we refer to when we mean revolutionary. Let's go back. It was a hot day, August 28th, 1963, when people of all creeds and colors and backgrounds and cultures came to Washington, D.C. for a march and a demonstration. What do you think the purpose of the March on Washington was? Knowing what you know about the March on Washington, write down in your journal or consider and think, what was the purpose? What was the why? And I'll give you time to do that. Do 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 do. Time. The answer, the purpose of the march, the why, it was to advocate for and bring attention to the lack of civil rights and the lack of economic rights for Black people in America. The official name of the March on Washington was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The leaders met with President Kennedy before the march to discuss civil rights issues and economic rights issues. Once they reached the Lincoln Memorial, speakers spoke, singers sang. I suggest that you Google the singers and watch the videos of them singing. People like Odessa, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Marian Anderson, Bob Dylan, and others. I also suggest you Google the speeches and check out what people were saying that day so that you can understand what was on people's minds on that day. John Lewis, beloved congressman, was the youngest speaker, only 23 years old. He represented SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and so you should definitely check out those speeches. The march and the program were powerful, but they were not perfect. No woman was allowed to give a speech. In other words, the patriarchy was there as well. After all, it was 1963. They thought about it, but nope, some women sang. Lena Horne was presented to the crowd, but not allowed to address the crowd. Myrlie Evers, the recent widow of Medgar Evers, was supposed to address the group. However, activist Daisy Bates spoke just over 100 words in her place because Evers missed her flight. So again, it wasn't perfect. Josephine Baker did address the crowd, but That wasn't a part of the formal program. She spoke before it officially started. The keynote was, of course, delivered by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., quote, the moral leader of the time, who had been on the national stage since 1955, calling America to be true to what it said on paper. In other words, to change the status quo. Before he shares his dream, King delivers a very calculated speech. His words are fiery, but obviously measured. You can see as he speaks that he is constantly reading the words, looking down, then looking up, delivering a passionate oratory, a plea for change. But in the "I have a dream" portion of the speech, he is extemporaneously preaching as only a third-generation black preacher could. I want us to listen to and to understand his words through a revolutionary lens. 1963, after all, was the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. It marked 100 years that most black people in this country were no longer slaves. King starts by describing this fact, then lays the groundwork for his argument. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. And he discusses the poverty and the issues plaguing black people and informs the world of the why of the march. Let's take a look.
And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
A bad check, insufficient funds, but we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We've come to cash a check. That's revolutionary. Yes, King's dream was nice, but the point of the speech was to cash their check, to get what was promised to all Americans, the same unalienable rights as our white counterparts. This is why it's revolutionary. The status quo at the time was government-sanctioned systems of oppression and economic exploitation of black people, and King says we are bringing attention to this. Justice is not bankrupt. You have not given us what we are owed. We want our money. We want our justice. We want our rights. He then answers the calls for the critics that say, wait, not to move too fast. Remember, 1963. It's 8 years after the Montgomery bus boycott. It's after the sit-ins have started, and they're in full effect all over the South. The freedom rides had started, and they're challenging the Supreme Court decision that ruled segregated buses, public buses, unconstitutional. These civil rights victories took place and grew into revolutionary acts. People in the movement were calling for bringing about change, and most people don't like change. So many moderates said, wait, don't go too fast. It's getting violent. It's getting rough. It's getting tough. To which King responded, we have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now, he said. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gratitude gradualism. In other words, movement is on our side. And why would we slow up now? This is not to make racists comfortable. We are here to cash our check. We want ours. Now is the time. The fierce urgency of now. Revolution, changing the status quo. Hear it from King directly.
Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges.
Revolutionary. Radically new, innovative, outside of the established procedure. We are here to change, to make America different, and we will not stop until we get what we are working for. Now, I hesitated to call this series Revolutionary King because of the negative connotation that many have regarding the word. We love, honor, and glorify Revolutionary War. Yet when the oppressed and marginalized minorities start to talk about revolution, changing their situation, then people who already have the social, political, and economic power that we want get nervous because they wonder what that means for them. And they wonder if it's going to be violent or if they're going to get hurt. And I argue that the fear is that black people will do to them what they did to black people. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me, what do you think? Demanding rights is not a violent act. Withholding them, tear gassing protesters, shooting innocent and unarmed, that's the violence. People complain at the phrase Black Lives Matters as if that declaration somehow dehumanizes other groups. The reality is that white lives in this country have always mattered more than black ones. And if Black lives mattered as much currently and historically as white lives, we wouldn't have to even declare that Black Lives Matters. I even heard someone say once, what if we say Black Lives Matter too? As in addition to. That honors the fact that there is a difference in how black people are treated, while acknowledging that other lives matter as well. To this I responded, why do black people who have endured 402 years of systemic racist violence and racial violence have to constantly be plagued and concerned about other people's feelings concerning our oppression? Furthermore, Black Lives Matter too establishes a baseline for the lives that already matter, the norm, the white ones. But that's the problem, right? That's the given. The Revolutionary Act is to change this norm, the status quo, to establish or accepted procedure to speak of black lives being worthy of something without worrying about the fragility of white people being left out of the conversation or forgotten, because that never happens. The discomfort of those with the rights and privileges is essential in revolution. It is necessary. It forces you to make the changes and shift. If everyone likes, approves of, agrees to, and condones the changes, then there would be no need for revolt. It would just happen. Unfortunately, the discomfort is part of the work. It is to agitate. Agitation brings attention and awareness, causes debate, and causes court trials, and then causes decisions that could move the conversation forward and bring about the positive and lasting change that we are working for. So when King says, quote, "And there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights, the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges," some white people hear violence, destruction, looting. No, King is calling for demonstrations, sit-ins, marches, freedom rides, agitations, opportunities to highlight the injustice so that things can change and lasting change can happen. Whenever people say that's not the way to do it, perhaps it's not always the way to do it. But the leaders of this time believed that weaponizing nonviolent direct action was the best way to bring about change. Going to the streets and demanding changes brings awareness and can change laws. I am a firm believer in nonviolent direct action. Don't believe the hype that Black Lives Matter is violent. It is not. According to the FBI, 93% of Black Lives Matter protests have been peaceful, and many of the 7% that had issues often had non-Black agitators involved. I am not for any violence, period. But I am for the agitation. Keep marching, keep pushing, keep raising your voice. Like King talked about in the I Have a Dream speech, I don't think nonviolent direct action is the only thing we should do. I do think that we must also use the political and legislative tools at our hands. But agitation and direct actions cause pressure and attention in a way that is very, extremely powerful. Breonna Taylor's death in her bedroom watching a movie was terrible. People in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, and all across the country, even the world, took to the streets. Many places now have Breonna's laws banning no-knock warrants. Nonviolent direct action makes change. What do you say? What does agitation look like in our current time? How do we do that? Should we do it? If not, what is the alternative? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Let me know. King makes sure to discourage violence as well. He says, quote, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must never conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all of white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, and they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. For some, the Revolutionary Act is white and black people working together to bring about change. Many people, even today, view racism and racial violence as a black problem. No, it is an American problem. We all struggle with it. And it causes issues in our nation, and it hinders our unity. Changing the established procedure meant having white people and black people work together, agitating and bringing awareness until change comes. The final movement of the speech portion of the address is when King shares the ultimate goal of the work. Here's King.
There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied. As long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
That last line about justice is a Bible verse. And honestly, this is the point when the message shifts from speech to sermon. And he gives us the charge, the what to do. Quote, I am not unmindful of some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells, and some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to do the work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. So go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. He goes on to say, let us not wallow in the valley of despair. King is still speaking to us through the corridors of time. Go back. Start in your own community, your own sphere of influence, and get to working. I'm working on a video called Beyond Facebook, How to be an Anti-Racist in Real Life. I'm not judging, but for many people, the bulk of their action, their non-racist action, is on Facebook posts or sharing online. At the time of this video's release, we are in the middle of global pandemic. So yes, we can only do so much physically and in person, but we can do other things than just Facebook. What can we do to be anti-racist? 1, educate yourself. You are educating yourself right now watching this video, learning. I think learning history, concepts, and ideas is the greatest thing that we can do in many instances. Knowledge is power, right? It's a great first step. Number 2, find your people. I am one of your people. Find the organizations that are doing the work in your community. Give them your time, volunteer, your money, your support, your friendship. Talk to them, learn, glean from them. Number 3, use your power. What power do you have? Work within your level of influence. If you are a teacher, what are ways that you can elevate marginalized voices in your profession? What are things you can do, or what are things that you see that are racist and support systems of racial violence? How can you bring awareness? What can you do to change, to improve? Be creative. Bloom where you are planted, and with what you have to work with it. Number 4, do the work. Don't be afraid to get it wrong. Show up and stand up for justice. Make that commitment to yourself, not just after the murder of some unarmed Black person or after some big event, but every single day in your life with the influence and energy that you have. If you are white, this means siding with the oppressed, choosing to move beyond any safety or comfort in your whiteness to sit with and stand with those who are oppressed because you feel that it is the right thing to do. Making yourself a target, making yourself uncomfortable, maybe even unpopular simply because you believe in your heart it is right. Choose to do the work and make it a way of life. Work with your children. Every single day, what am I doing to end racism today? After King gives the charge, go back, don't give up, hope, work, he then shares what can happen one day once the check is cashed and justice is served. Quote, and so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. And he goes on to share his dream. I still tear up when I see or hear him deliver that portion of the speech. Okay. Let me know what you think. Watch the speech. I'll put the link. And thank you again for your patronage. I am really, really grateful for it. And take care. Love you. Peace.